Greetings from Paha Sapa, the place where the Lakota people come to pray for the state of the world, also known as the Black Hills of South Dakota. My hometown, Lead, South Dakota. I am a ham radio operator, call sign W1, GV Whiskey 1, Golf, Victor, and my ham radio station, aka Nerd Cave, is right behind you. Right behind you. Planets, telescope, the whole nerdy apparatus here. Well, what I have here is a little story for you. If you're a ham radio operator, this ought to interest you. One of my colleagues just sent me an email talking about how if you have a high band antenna like 15, 20, 10 meters or anything above 14 megahertz or thereabouts, fed with coaxial cable, and you want to listen on the lower bands like 160 meters or 80 meters, if the feed line is relatively long, you can unscrew the little PL259 connector in the back of your radio part way so that the shield is no longer connected and only the center conductor is connected. So in a sense, you get kind of an end-fed wire antenna that goes to your radio. I haven't tried that here because I am able to hear a few signals on those higher bands, or lower bands, pardon me, longer wavelengths with the little 20 meter, 22 foot vertical that I've got on the deck. I can still hear signals there. There's so much noise at this location that it's kind of academic. If I were to get more signal into the radio by pulling that little stunt with the PL259 in the back, I'd have so much more noise. I mean, the signal to noise ratio wouldn't be any better anyway. But I have a little story for you. Back when I was a kid, about 17 years old, 18 years old, I had an antenna very similar to the one I've got now. I lived in my parents' house, of course. I went to high school in Rochester, Minnesota, and my station was in a fallout shelter. It was built after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Coax ran all around and up and out the house and up to the roof where my little antenna was. As I remember, it was a dedicated 10, 15, and 20 meter antenna. We didn't have 12 meters, and we didn't have 17 meters, and we didn't have 30 meters back then. But we did have 160 meters. So I did that little trick. I pulled that PL259, unscrewed the outer part of it, and just fed it with the center conductor, getting an end-fed random wire. And I decided I was going to just try that on 160 meters and see what would happen. So I did. And wouldn't you know, that antenna worked fabulously. Fabulously. It defied all engineering principles because by all rights and reasons, it shouldn't have worked worth beans on 160, and yet it did. That's the same antenna, by the way, that I screwed plugged into the microphone jack of my old Drake T4X transmitter. Set that thing on AM at 3.500 megahertz in the spot mode so it wouldn't transmit over the air, and then listened to the sidebands that were created by whatever came down that feed line into that radio. I tuned away with my R4A Drake receiver and listened to the sidebands with the receiver set to receive CW, and wouldn't you know it, I heard VLF on there. Very low frequency. I heard WWVL at 20 kilohertz, and I heard WWVB at 60 kilohertz, and a whole bunch of stuff all the way down to 13 kilohertz I could hear signals, most of which sounded like narrowband or narrow shift radio teletype, some of which were very strong indeed, and I got a really good signal to noise ratio out of that. I had created a VLF converter out of those old radios. So there's a couple of stories for you. Just thought maybe if you're a ham radio operator, you might like this kind of stuff. You don't know that something's not going to work just because the theory says it's not. And as my advisor in college told me at the University of Minnesota, when I was majoring in physics, before I switched to mathematics, he said, one experimentalist can keep a dozen theorists busy. Well, I'd say it's more like 100 or maybe even 1,000,000. Because stuff works when it shouldn't. Of course, it also doesn't work when it should. But that's the topic for another rant. Stan Jabalisco W1GV Whiskey 1 Golf Victor from the Nerd Cave in Pahasapa, United States of America, also known as the Black Hills. Till next time, 73, and so long.